Well, hey everyone, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Austin. This is Gospel Simplicity, a place where we're passionate about the beautiful simplicity and transformative power of the gospel, and I am so glad that you're here today. Today we will be continuing in our series, Life in the Word, a weekly Bible study where we seek to unpack and explore books of the Bible one chapter at a time, and we have been going through the book of John for the past few months now, and we are almost done. We are coming to what is one of the climactic scenes in the book of John, and really one of the climactic scenes in history. It's a moment that changed the world. Today we're going to be talking about the crucifixion of Jesus. But before we do that, I want to encourage you to go ahead and grab a Bible. That can be a physical copy, a digital copy, an audio copy, whatever works for you. But if you take the time to go ahead and read the chapter, listen to it, whatever, you will get so much more out of this because we won't have the time to read every piece of it and you'll know what's going on. So I'd really encourage you to do that. But as you're doing that, I just want to say a couple quick thank yous. First of all, a huge thank you to my Patreon subscribers and merch buyers who make this channel possible. Because of their generosity, especially my monthly patrons who give to this channel every month, this channel is not only able to be sustainable, but it allows it to grow into exciting and new things. And I'm so grateful for them. So if you want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a patron using the link down below or going to patreon.com/gospelsimplicity. Another group I'd like to thank today would be Kindred. Kindred is a ministry that exists to help people reclaim sacred time with God in their daily lives. They do this by creating these beautiful Bibles that help people engage with Scripture in new and profound ways. They're complete with full-page pictures, and the way it's laid out will force you to kind of read more slowly, more contemplatively. I think you'll really get a lot out of it. I've really enjoyed it. So if you're wanting to spice up your Bible reading, you need a beautiful coffee table book, or you just love Bibles like I do, you can go ahead and go to kindredapostle.com and use the promo code GOSPEL10 for 10% off your order today. Well, with all that being said, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and pause the video, read the chapter, and we will be right back. All right, now that you have done that, you know, if you've watched these videos before, where we are going to start. And that is, we are going to start with the idea of context, because, say it with me, a text without context is in danger of becoming a fill in the blank. It's pretext. You win. Yes, we always want to be looking at the context. And when we talk about context, we're usually talking about the historical cultural context and the literary context. So that means, when was this book written? Like, to whom was it written? What was that time period like? What is the cultural divide between us and them, and how can we bridge that gap in order to make sense of what this means for us today, to go from the meaning of the text in its original audience to what it means for us? That's a big part of the context. There's also the literary context. So how has the author shaped this work, and where does this specific section fall within that grand arc of the plot within the book, and what is he trying to do, and what are the motifs he's using? Obviously, we can't cover all of that today. We've been covering different sections of that throughout different videos, but if you're brand new to the series, the best place you could go would be back to chapter 1, where we cover a lot of the basics of the book. But for now, what is important, I guess, to know for this section in terms of literary context, we've talked about you can divide the book of John into either 2 or 3 parts. The first part being chapters 1 through 12, which is Jesus' ministry and his miracles, and John making the case that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and in him you can have life. And then you can either say from there on out you have the passion narrative and include the farewell discourse in that, or you can say, hey, actually we have this intimate farewell discourse between Jesus and his disciples in chapters about 13 to 17. And then in 18 through 20, I guess you could count 21 as an epilogue, but you have the true passion narrative where Jesus is handed over. We looked last week at chapter 18 where Jesus is betrayed by Judas. And this week we are going to look at the crucifixion of Jesus, which is not an easy thing to read. And one of the biggest things I want you guys to think about as we read this text is the fact that you've probably, I'm making an assumption here, and if you're new to that, I'm super excited. I'd be pumped if this is the first time you're reading about these things. But I know for many of you, you grew up hearing about the crucifixion of Jesus. It's lost its scandalous nature to you. It's just another Bible story. Maybe you even read it in your children's Bible like I did, and it's kind of interesting that we read about crucifixions in a children's Bible. In fact, there's a lot of weird things about children's Bibles, like Noah's Ark is not a children's story. Can we talk about that for a second? We can't. We've got things to do. But what I want you to think about is the sheer scandal of this story. I mean, throughout the book, John has been making the case that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. He has been talking about how Jesus and the Father are one. If you were a pretentious theology major like I try not to be, you might talk about it as a high Christology, but you probably don't, because no one talks like that. At least the people don't have many friends, and they read more books than anyway. But what we do see here is that John is showing that, hey, Jesus, he's God. And then read this chapter in light of that. That the Son of God came into this world, as he says in the beginning, and he uses that fun phraseology in chapter 1, he tabernacled with us, echoing the Old Testament, that God was present in the midst of his people in a new and profound way in the person of Jesus, who is the perfect image of God, who the Word was with God, the Word was God. We've seen throughout that he has this beautiful picture of Jesus that is God among us. And then this God among us dies on a cross by the very people he came to save, by his own people. If you're reading the book of John in light of the Old Testament, which you must do, we'll see it specifically in this chapter why that's so important. But he's showing that the very people, that God's covenant people who he has worked with so patiently, so lovingly, who is, in Exodus he's described as, by his loyal love, that he is, patient, merciful, abounding in love, long-suffering. These are the very people that hand him over to be crucified. And so those are the things I want you to be thinking about here. We'll talk a little bit more about specific historical things, but let's go ahead and jump into the text. John chapter 19 starts with Jesus before Pilate. Pilate has been going back and forth. He's saying, look, I didn't see anything wrong with them, but then he tries this ploy of, who do you want me to release? Jesus, this, non-violent, Jewish teacher, or do you want me to release this criminal? Much to his surprise, they say, give us Barabbas. And we talked last week about how we too make that decision when we deny Jesus. We say, give me Barabbas. But now, Pilate, he's still not on board with fully doing this, but we see he has him flogged. Now, the Romans were masters of torture and punishment. They had 3 levels of flogging. John doesn't exactly tell us what's going on here, but we do think it's one of the more severe levels. And I want you to think about this. Jesus, God himself, being flogged, his skin ripping and tearing, crying out in pain. Jesus was fully human. He is flogged, and then he is mocked, a crown of thorns put on his head, a purple robe put around him that would be covered and caked in blood as he is beaten and bruised and bloodied. And they mock him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." We'll see that as a motif going throughout. Once again, Pilate tries to reason with the Jews, saying, hey, and actually, I want to have a brief excursus here. This is something that comes up a lot in the book of John. Is it the book of John anti-Semitic? And of course, John is Jewish. So first of all, that question's strange to start with, but it's a question scholars have asked. And when we see these blanket terms for the Jews, it's often used not to refer to the Jewish people as a whole here. You can see that in a more in-depth study of John's usage of the word. But what we see here is the religious leaders who are specifically working against the plan of God, who are in this way like the anti-Jews, because the Jews are meant to be the people of God, and they're fundamentally working against that nature. And so he's not saying like all Jewish people are bad, but we see here that the Jewish leaders are saying crucify him, and they go back and forth, and Pilate's like, look, I don't see anything wrong with this guy. But then they tell him that this man is claimed to be the Son of God. And at this point, Pilate gets scared. In other gospel accounts, we see, this idea of Pilate's wife telling him, like, you can't do this. This is bad. Her having a dream. And Pilate, being, a polytheistic Roman by most accounts, we would assume, he takes this claim likely seriously. And this is a scary thing. The idea that there could be like this demigod among them isn't entirely foreign to him like it could be to us. And of course, I'm not saying Jesus is a demigod, but just the way he might have interpreted that. And there's this really interesting scene. In chapter 18, we saw Jesus and Pilate going back and forth, and Jesus showing, hey, I've got authority over this guy. Like, I don't need to bend to the Jewish authority. I don't need to bend to the authority of Pilate. In fact, before I was doing this, I did a bit of a word study on this idea of authority. Really fascinating word to look up throughout the Gospel of John and throughout the Gospels in general. I'd recommend it. But Pilate tells him, when Jesus doesn't respond, do you not know, this verse 10, that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you. And I can just imagine Jesus looking at him, thinking, if only you knew. And Jesus answered him, you would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. Now, first of all, this idea of authority is hearkening back to John 10. In John 10, Jesus says that he has authority to lay down his life and take it back up. It's kind of a cryptic claim at that point. If you're not reading it in light of the end of the story, like any of us do because we know how it ends, it's an interesting claim. And here Jesus is showing once again, Pilate, you have no authority over me. None at all. But I am willing to do what must be done in accordance with the scriptures, what must be done in order to save the world. That first idea, in accordance with the scriptures, is really important throughout this. I told you that you need to read John in light of the Old Testament, specifically in light of Genesis is a big part. John has kind of framed the book around Genesis, he echoes Genesis 1:1 in the beginning. In the beginning was in the beginning was God, but in the beginning was the Word, and there's this really interesting play there, which is a huge claim. But what we also see throughout John is, especially in this narrative, the way that this is connected to the Old Testament. None of this is happening by chance. All of this is happening so that the promises of God might be fulfilled. Pilate has no authority to kill Jesus, but Jesus, in the providence of God, has the authority to lay down his life for the sake of the world. And here we have, once again, a back and forth. There's also the idea of he who delivered me has the greater sin. Scholars have debated, what does that mean? You're not talking about, God for sure, because you can't say God sinned. Is it Judas? But that doesn't really make sense. He kind of drops out of the narrative pretty quickly. But actually, the words used there they fit best with the Jewish leaders, with Caiaphas perhaps, in particular the high priest. And so we see again this idea of hey, the very people I came to save, the very people that I have loved throughout their history, despite their unfaithfulness to me, I have always been faithful to them. They are the ones who have sinned. And some commentators say, he's saying they've sinned on two levels. They've sinned for accusing an innocent man, and they've sinned for abusing their spiritual power. But it goes on, and then Pilate still wants to release him. He's kind of scared at this point. But then there is this interesting idea of a king. Now, the Jewish people had been kind of a dissident political group for a while with the Romans. I mean, you've got a long history there, and it's a really great thing to read up on if you want to understand the history of about first century Judaism, would be to understand the Maccabean revolutions and the way that Antiochus Epiphanes comes in, and the Greek conquest, the Greek and then the Roman conquest of Israel, and the political tensions. We don't have time to get into all of that now, but suffice it to say that the Jewish leaders saying, we have no king but Caesar, is disingenuous at best, and outright manipulation most likely. They don't respect Caesar, but they know that this is going to play on Pilate in a special way. He has to respect that idea. He has to remember that he is a civil servant of the emperor. And if people are siding with the emperor, he can't be siding with this Jewish teacher. And it puts him in a difficult place, and ultimately he has to hand him over to be crucified. But there is an important thing that we want to see here. Throughout, John hasn't been he's not super concerned with chronology, and this is something that often kind of bugs modern readers. But it's important to know that at this point, and especially in the Old Testament, but the expectations for historical writings were very different than what we have now. If a historian today were to write a history of, say coronavirus, and he did it out of chronological order, he probably wouldn't sell many copies. But back in these times, that was a perfectly acceptable way to do it. These are not just pure historical biographies. The Gospels are often best described as theological biographies. They have a purpose for writing these. They're not writing these for pure history. And John specifically feels free to kind of rearrange the material for his theological purposes. We're not saying it's ahistorical then. We're just saying that there's a literary artistry to it. But here John wants to say specifically, he gives us this point. It was the day of the preparation of the Passover. That's verse 14. He even gives us the time. It was about the 6th hour. Now, this is really important, and we don't have time to get into the differences that are proposed between the John and the Synoptics and how that worked with Passover. There are proposals that, at this point, there were so many lambs that had to be killed that day was actually kind of 2 days That's one way to read it. We won't get into all of that now. But what John wants to show us is it was the day of the preparation of the Passover. At this time, Josephus tells us that there would be like thousands upon thousands upon thousands of lambs being slaughtered on this day. In fact, some historians have proposed that actually the lambs would be slaughtered with their legs splayed out like on a cross. And it's in that background, as they're in Jerusalem, maybe they could even, some of the people are thinking as they read this, they can hear the cries of those slaughtered lambs. They can smell the blood that would have been everywhere. It was on that day when lambs were slain. Jesus goes to the cross, of course. This is no coincidence. Jesus is the fulfillment of the Passover. No longer is it a Passover lamb that would wash over their sins, but it would be the one who is the Passover lamb, the Passover lamb that would exceed all Passover lambs, the antitype to the type, the one that would fulfill this and take it further, the one whose blood would only have to be shed once, the one perpetual sacrifice, the once for all sacrifice that talks about in Hebrews. He is the one that is about to be killed. He would be the great Passover lamb whose blood shed would atone for all of our sins. It is in that context that Jesus goes to the cross. Again, John wants to show this crucifixion. It is not Jesus falling at the hands of the Romans. It is Jesus fulfilling his mission. That is a key idea here throughout. We're going to see that more in the crucifixion, but you need to get that. For John, this is not a defeat. And in the first century, imagine trying to spread a religion of a crucified itinerant Jewish rabbi. That would not go over well. That is not power. We look now and we even think that there might be something, beautiful about a martyr. But in the first century, there was nothing beautiful to them about one who had fallen at the hands of the empire. This idea, this archetypal character that we now have of the one who lays down his life, that really didn't even exist then. There's people that have done great work on that, but that's really a Christian ideal that comes from Jesus. So we see here John being careful to show that Jesus is not being defeated. This is Jesus' victory. He is in control the entire time. He has, again, that idea of authority. Okay, I'm going on too long. Let's continue. Going to the crucifixion, we see Jesus carrying his cross. There was actually about 4 different ways that crucifixions happened at this time. The most common we have, of course, is that of a cross like this. That's how art has depicted it ever since, and I don't see any reason to assume that's not how it was. But one thing that might be a little off in that art that we often see is Jesus carrying the full cross. Actually, most times we would have a singular pole fixed there, and then the cross beam would be affixed once you got up there. So in that case, Jesus probably carrying that cross beam going up. They would also sometimes crucify people in like an X pattern, sometimes just on a stake, sometimes in a T, but not really important for right now. So they crucified him with 2 others. We have that place, this Golgotha, and there's different historical things going on there. It's a little difficult to say exactly where that is, but we do have, I believe it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that's on the traditional location there. But in any case, we have him up there, and Pilate writes on it that Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And he's saying, look, guys, I know you've been saying like this place that Jesus isn't the King of the Jews. You've tried to play me with saying you have no king but Caesar, but I am going to, well, one, he's mocking them, but he's really putting this back in their face. This man is claimed to be King of the Jews, and whether he believes it or not is difficult to say, but it is significant that perhaps even Pilate, despite himself, is being used by God to declare the truth, that Jesus is the king. Now, I've often seen people make much of the fact that it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. I've even seen people use this as a reason for the Latin Mass and the Latin Vulgate. To me, that just seems to be a weak argument, but if you espouse that argument and you want to let me know in the comments why you think it's a good argument, I'd love to know why, because I just don't see it, but I could be missing it. Now, again, from here on out, John plays on all of these, what he sees as kind of prophetic fulfillments in the cross. And they're from the Psalms, they're from Isaiah, a lot from the Psalms. And it's just fascinating. First, we see Jesus' garments being taken in. The soldiers are contrasted with Mary, the Marys, plural, and John. While the soldiers look on with disdain, they don't even care. They're kind of laughing. They're gambling over Jesus' clothes. Mary, Jesus' mother, is there, and you can just imagine her weeping at the side of the cross. Actually, I have an icon here of Jesus. And I love looking at this scene in the morning of the crucifixion and just imagining that moment as a mother seeing that. It's worth noting that in this idea of the tunic, again, this is a prophetic fulfillment. Cyprian here sees this as, that his tunic was seamless as kind of an allegory of the unity of the church. I don't really see a basis for that. I think we can get in trouble when we can make anything out to be an allegory. It gets into big hermeneutical questions. I just thought it was worth letting you know. If you want to chase that rabbit down, you can. But I know what my audience really wants to know is, what do I think about the fact of Jesus' final words to his mother being, "Woman, behold your son," and to John, the disciple whom he loved, "Behold your mother." Now, this has been made out to be a huge doctrine, and this is partially used for the perpetual virginity of Mary, that, hey, Jesus wouldn't have placed Mary in the care of one of his disciples if she had other kids. I think that's kind of a decent case. I mean, I'm not sure we can base the whole thing on it, but it would have been a real slap in the face to his brothers, if he had them, to place his mother in the care of one of his disciples. Interesting thing to think about. What is often drawn out, though, is that therefore, John is this universal character. He's like the ideal disciple. Therefore, Mary is the mother of all disciples. She's the mother of the church. I understand the argument, and I want to be respectful of it, and I think there is some merit to it. But I think it's worth noting that the emphasis here, the final line, is that from that hour the disciple took her to his own home. That, hey, Jesus is taking care of his mother through John, that she's being taken care of. And what the Catholic motif often does is kind of flip that on its head, that it's Mary becoming the mother of John, which isn't. Behold your mother. It's said there. But the emphasis seems to be on John taking care of Mary. And lest this seem like just like a Protestant response to something, that's actually the very same angle that both Augustine and St. John Chrysostom both take. They're saying, hey, here Jesus is showing that it is like morally right to take care of your parents. And they talk about how Jesus had rebuked the Pharisees for not taking care of their parents by trying to use like a loophole in the law. Is saying Jesus here is showing his great love for his mother by showing that, hey, you need to take care of your parents. And I think that's a great thing and a beautiful teaching here. And I don't think that has to be disrespectful to Mary to say that the primary emphasis was on Mary being taken care of. So I think to make this text primarily about Mary taking care of the church seems like a bit of a stretch. But again, I'm open to people arguing that, and I just don't think this text is exactly teaching that. But again, that might come down to hermeneutics, the difference of defending a doctrine from the text, which might be a more Catholic approach, and deriving a doctrine from the text, which might be a more Protestant approach. That's definitely a generalization. But for what it's worth, I thought I'd bring that up. So finally, we have Jesus dying in verse 28 through 30, him giving up his spirit. And I think that's really important, the way that's said, that he gave up his spirit. Jesus isn't killed, but he gives up his life. Again, he has authority to take for his life to be taken from him. He is the one in control here. This is not happening outside the purview of his power, his authority as the Son of God. Now, there's really only one final thing I want to look at. We're not going to get too much into the burial of Jesus here. There's interesting things there. But I want to get into this idea that the soldiers come and they pierce the side of Jesus. Now, John gives us this strange detail that blood and water flow out from his side. And for the most part, like hyper-allegorical readings of passages, I'm not a big fan of, because I think they lose kind of some hermeneutical objectivity that might not be what the text actually meant, and we can kind of run wild with that, and we can make the text say anything. And I think there's lots of examples of this, and I actually think that's one good thing about the Reformation, is that they went back to the sensus literalis of the text, which, there had become a common fourfold way of interpreting the text. And this is very early, I admit, of like the allegorical, the moral, the spiritual, and the literal, and sometimes emphasizing others of those meanings. In fact, even Aquinas really had a great love for the sensus literalis. And the Reformers run with that, though they wouldn't want to attribute it to Aquinas, of course. But here there is this interesting detail. What do we do with this? John is he's been very intentional. He's a literary artist. Why does he give us this detail that blood and water flow out? I can't say for sure. But for great lengths of time throughout the church. Again, Augustine goes here. Almost everyone goes here. Chrysostom goes here. There's several other fathers that go with this. That way we hear the blood is, that the blood of Jesus that saves us. There's also sometimes connections to the Eucharist there. And then there is the water, which is baptism. Some say, the two, sacraments there, which as a Protestant, I'm cool with saying 2 sacraments, but obviously, Catholics, Orthodox have the extended 7 sacraments. It's fine. That's a conversation for another day. But what I do want to say is I think that could be a very legitimate reading of this text. Jesus said, earlier on, unless you're born of water and spirit, you cannot enter into the kingdom. There was this motif of water that we traced for a lot of the beginning of the Gospel of John. Here seems to be the climax of it, that water comes from his side. Why would he tell us that? Well, the other instances of water, some of them link back to baptism. I think that's a fair link to make. The blood of the lamb here being efficacious, like the Passover lamb. Again, it's even here it's saying on the day of preparation. I think that's significant. If you want to connect it to the wine in the Eucharist, I think that connection could be made maybe a little more difficult, but we do have Jesus earlier saying, drink my blood, eat my flesh, and so we could connect it there to John 6. In any case, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. But as we close, I just want to leave you with the idea, once again, we've gone through this quickly, and man, I wish we could spend weeks on this. But the Son of God, with all authority, allows himself to be killed. Just the ultimate show of vulnerability, of humility, of love that the world has ever seen. That God in the flesh would allow himself to be killed by his own creation, that we might have life. That's the God we worship, and that should tell us a lot about what greatness is. Greatness isn't, stomping down the Romans. Greatness isn't overthrowing by use of power. Greatness is laying down their life for others. I believe it's in 1 John that greater love has none than this, that he laid down his life for a friend. I can't imagine John's not reflecting on this, his experience of being there and seeing this. And that changes everything. That changes what it means to succeed in life. That, remember, our ideal is a crucified Savior hanging naked on the cross, mocked, beaten, and scorned, that others might have life. That changes everything, and may we orient our lives around that. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you guys. If you're new to the channel, I'd encourage you to subscribe, become a part of this community. And if you want to support it, you can go to Patreon or use any of the links down below. In any case, thank you guys so much for being here. Until next time, go out and love God and love others. It's truly, above all else, that will change the world.